Welcome to session 6. This is the final session of this pilot Open Academy. And we're really glad that you've been able to come along, and hopefully you've gotten as much out of this as we have. Some of the things that have been unique for us in this experience is, trying to provide an opportunity that goes far and wide while keeping it nicely digestible, right? So hopefully you felt the same. All right, so with that, we do have some wrap-up ground that we want to cover today. And again, just to go over the basics, this is the final session for the Spring Open Academy. Can't believe it's May already next week. And if there's anything from sessions 1 through 5 that you're interested in catching up on or reviewing, all of that information is available and will remain available for, the future. It's not going to go away from the website anytime soon. But including, there is actually an exercise for today's session. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we will post this video as well. Thanks to those of you who were able to hop on to our little office hours session last Thursday. That was nice and engaging. It was a good handful of people who came with some new questions that they had thought about as they were working through either one of the online tools or working with Eco after Jason gave us such a broad presentation of how to really get into an inventory. So we have provided, now that we've taken a look at all the tools, we have provided an exercise for session 6 today, and it's really about taking some of that and developing your own action plan. So which is what we're going to talk about today, is how to take this data that we now know how to look at and what do we do with it? How do we make it work for us? And finally, I just wanted to remind everybody that information, we know some of you are looking for certificates of completion. We will address this again at the end of the session, but essentially what's going to happen is that we'll go ahead and send a feedback form to everybody. We'll have a couple of questions that will relate to what you're seeking for your certificate, and we'll keep you informed from there. So we're not going to give you that survey online here today. We'll be sure to send it out to everybody as a follow-up. And of course, it will ask you for some additional feedback, which we definitely want and which we're looking forward to. So thank you. But look for that in the days ahead. So today what we want to do is focus more broadly on what it means to put these tools into action. And you may still be thinking about which tools are most applicable for you where you are, or if you're thinking about what you're trying to do with data about tree benefits. There are lots of ways to think about how you're going to make that meaningful and how you're going to put that into context. So each of the, we've talked about how each of the iTree tools really does have, they have specific features that help them shine for particular projects. Some offer speed and simplicity, such as MyTree and Our Trees. And even, if we talk about quick assessments, we're talking about Canopy and something like Design that can help us think about our approach for species-specific information. Some of the tools are offering visualizations or helpful descriptions of the results that you're seeing. Some of them, like Eco primarily, but also like Planting, they're offering a little bit more of an in-depth analysis. All of them really are offering ways for you to take data about the benefits that trees provide and talk about that meaningfully for your needs. And when we say that, we mean that part of it is about translating the data. Part of it is about managing the data so that you can present it in a form that is easily received by others, right? The people you're trying to talk to, whether or not it's about your desire to plant more trees, talk to people about why your project might call for additional plantings, or do you want to speak to management and overall care to make sure that you're doing whatever you can to protect the canopy that you have in order of prioritizing some of those benefits. So again, we're going to start today with approaches to more broadly, really education. We'll talk about how to think about audiences, young and not so young, right? When you're bringing this information to people, and where do you start? What do you do to light the fire? We'll talk about community engagement, and we'll talk about how to think about your iTree data as a way to advocate, again, for tree care, or a way to talk about a whole mess of constituents and what that can entail. But then we'll also talk about the opportunities for bigger picture management, whether it has to do with those inventories or looking down the road. And again, understanding what you have, where you have it, and how you're trying to, today we're using, how do you want it to grow and what does that mean for you? So what I want to do is right off the top, bring us back to Dave Bloniarz is going to talk to us today about education. He has been an iTree educator for, well, as long as I've known him and for a lot longer before that. So as one of not only our biggest cheerleaders, but somebody who's been with us along the way. He's molded a lot of ways to get iTree out into the broader world, and we're grateful, and we always love hearing from him. Thanks, Dave. It's all you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Krista. I'll just get set up here and I'll try to get my PowerPoint up. We'll see that. Do you see that? Does
Yes,
that work?
looking
Okay.
good.
Okay, good. And you have the full screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, everybody. So as Krista said, I've been at iTree for a long time, and it seems like we just started with iTree yesterday. But one of the key things and one of the first things that we did when we brought iTree out to the public and cooperators, partners, and to agencies and other professionals was to offer some educational programming on how to use iTree. And I know Scott Macco remembers these, that were kind of, folks were overwhelmed and really, but excited. So that's one of the things we try to do with iTree, is to break it down to whatever group we're working with. And we've done that since the beginning, whether we're working with, and they made a little outline here, not an outline, but a topic here, and it says tools from 6th grade to medical students. And so I work with the wide range that includes all of those. I teach at the University of Massachusetts, and I teach, graduate level and undergraduates, as well as associate degree students. So there's a whole variety right there that we have to address. And I also work with high school students during the summer, as well as middle school, and then we start at 6th grade. So there's a wide range of things, and we try to come up with some practical applications for the classroom and beyond. So as Krista really did a great job explaining this morning or earlier, is all of the opportunities that come along with iTree, whether you're just trying to deliver a message to the public, you're trying to deliver a message to other constituents, you're trying to bring it to policymakers. And one of the neat things is we think iTree is one of the valuable tools for you to help secure funding for your programs. And I know you're mostly all aware of the Forest Service funding that's coming along, but not only that, but other foundation and other grant programs. iTree can give you a step up on other applicants when you start to tell some of the story of your own community. So we really like that. So education, we look at selecting a tool to use with the students at all the levels. So you want to choose an application that is easy to use for whoever you're working. So for a 6th grader, it's a little, you have to have something a little more simple. Than I work with medical students from the University of Massachusetts, 2nd year medical students from the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And I have 3 of them will be working with us here in Springfield this whole summer. And iTree is their first introduction they had for 2 weeks. And they were blown away by the importance and value of bringing public health components to it. So, but they can go in a little bit deeper than we can with a 6th grader. But it's adaptable iTree to a wide range of these user interests, and we can give you that accurate reporting that you've all learned about on the ecosystem services. And it's ideal for exploration of environmental issues at all grade levels. So the idea will be, if you're working with the high school students, their interests may be different than the 6th grade students, and they may be different than the college students. So here we're looking at the college level students. So these are just some kids, but they're all into the technology today. So most of the programming, as you know, we can use on our smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop computer as we bring it out into the field. And then if we're looking at the school age youth, they might not be as able to use some of the new technologies like smartphones, or just don't have those available because they're still young and don't own them. In the classrooms, we try to do things that are affordable. So a lot of times it's just paper, pencil, and some learning tools here. Kids are looking at identifying various components of the urban ecosystem. So we're tying iTree in to the bigger picture of looking at the urban landscape, including trees and including all the green space. And then here's some pictures of our middle and high school students working in a program we do in the summer called Off to the Great Outdoors, where they go out and they really start to explore. But one of the key components of that, we have a 6-week program, and for 3 of the weeks, we go out and we use iTree. And I'll show you in a few minutes which tools that we use with this level of students. So there's different tools and different components, but the idea is to bring them the understanding of the importance and value of the urban green space, sustainability, climate change, and how we can address global climate change at the local level. So it's kind of fun and interesting. And you see, one of the neat things about most of the pictures is we have all the folks are smiling. This is a green skills training we're working with. These are at-risk youth that are ages 21 to 31. These are in Boston. It's Boston's Power Corps. I know we have one. Power Corps operates in Philadelphia. But the neat thing of this is these folks here are just going to turn this knowledge and skills that they learn by taking iTree, and instead of just looking at trees as trees, they're looking at them as something that addresses climate change, that makes the community more healthier and more livable and a quality of life. And most of these folks are basically have received GEDs and then move into this program. So it's exciting. And the level of working with them is a little bit different than we would with, say, a graduate student. And then here's some of our university and college level students. They're all pretty serious kids and like to explore and learn a little bit here. And they're doing some eco work right here. And then we also work with international users. We work with the international program at the Forest Service, but we're bringing the same tools as part of our educational process to them. And then here's some of our UMass medical students that we had last fall. There's 4 of them there. 3 of those folks will be working with us this summer, and they're going to be doing some iTree Eco as well as some additional neighborhood green space analysis using iTree Canopy here in the city of Springfield, where my office is. So it's kind of interesting, and it's kind of, they'd never knew what a tree did until they utilized iTree. And they did a landscape project for the city of Springfield and were blown away by the information that it provided to them. But more importantly, what it opened for them as far as exploring the urban environment and looking at people, environmental justice, public health, and the variety of things that it provides. So we want to remember that kids today, college level and up, high school level and up, are all electronic. But I wanted to show you right here, I just put this a little bit together. So if I go here and I start on the left, which are going to be the hardest ones to bring to education, no matter what level you're working at, but generally the ones on the left, eco and landscape, are the more difficult or the more intensive programs that require a little bit more instruction on your part. So if you're going to be showing people and showcasing how these programs work, you're going to have to spend a little more time, and probably with the older students from high school up for both of those programs. If we look at the middle range right in here of design, planting, and species, these can be used by a practically anyone through of high school and up. Okay, so notice our young kids aren't able to basically grasp how to use design. Species, we do sort of at a cursory look with the youngest kids, but we bring that over here with the youngest folks looking at my tree, our trees, and canopy. So the fact that we're able to show a student and come up with the report right here in a visual format and have them make tags that they can hang on a tree. My tree, and I talked to you about my tree earlier in the course. It's really a great opportunity to introduce the students at all levels to the iTree suite, but more importantly, to look at the benefits, ecosystem services, and how trees are playing a major role in their urban landscape. And then our trees and canopy. So if we go from green to red, I'm more apt to know that we can show my tree, our trees, and canopy with most groups. Then if we go up to design, planting, and species, a little more intricate, a little more training, a little more explanation. And then you want to reserve the eco and landscape primarily for the students that are a little bit older and able to grasp the concepts and able to put the results to work. And that's one of the most important things. When we do our analysis, it's in the end, so what? And the so what of all this is at each level of immersion by these students, they have a different thing of what it means to them to look at this kind of information. So it's so kind of cool to look at a little kid's eyes light up, as well as a medical student that's way smarter than I ever planned to be. Oop, where are we going here? So the last thing I'll just point out is a couple things. We know we can produce these the tree benefits labels or tags that we can hang on trees. We can use them in our publications. We can share them with the public, and you can do these in a variety of ways. And I know we shared those with you as we went through. Here's one of my medical students that's working, and they try to convert these things into things that are understandable. The weight of an adult rhino. So there you go. That's how medical students think. But the idea is to have these tree tags and get them out into the public, go out and hang them. This is one of our city foresters that's setting up here for Earth Day Festival a couple weeks ago, and putting out the tag here of the value of trees that were at the site where this was held. So and then here I just want to show you a couple last pictures just of the kids that you can see at the 6th grade level. And here's our medical students, but they're making the same tags. If you'll notice, they're putting the things together, and then the tools, you can use professional tools. And in this case here, we make DBH tapes with engineer or survey tape, and the kids make them and the adults can use them. So here's the kids making those things. So you don't have to spend a ton of money. Here we have a clinometer that can look at the tree heights and measure, and also we make one here just out of a protractor, some string, and have the kids. And you can see one of our campers here in the summer program measuring the heights, and the kids recording the data. So I just wanted to show you this. And this last one, this is creating some tape measures so we can measure the distance from a tree and to where the person is standing measuring the tree if we use a triangulation method. So I just want to end there and just show you that there's a lot of different ways to do things. These were compasses that the kids make, and instead of having to supply one for $14 each, we just use a cork in a bowl of water, and then we just carry it out that way. So the easiest thing is to make it affordable, make it exciting, and to use the new technologies when we can. So I think I'll end right there. I know it's fast and furious, but I think it gives you a little bit of an idea. And if anyone has any questions on what I just presented, be happy to answer you at any time.
I think that was great, Dave. Thank you very much. And I always appreciate that you bring arts and crafts to your science craft. And I always feel like that's, particularly when you're looking for solid options for young kids or ways to foster that sense of fostering stewardship, when they're super young. And sometimes that involves getting your hands dirty. And if that's making your own compass, I'm all for it. All right. I want to take us from education, but to something, similar in nature. We'll talk about iTree for community engagement, and that can mean something different depending on the kind of work that you do and where you do it. So what we always sort of, I should say me, sometimes one of the things that I forget to mention more enthusiastically is that, we do try to remind people that one of the assets of iTree is that it is a free tool. So we, talk to lots of people who come to this with a small budget or no budget, or they're trying to do something unique within their particular objectives and their framework. And iTree can meet that in really a number of different ways. And it gives you a way to talk about trees in a lot of different ways, from benefits to reaching out to, contextual topics. So again, just, not community engagement doesn't always just mean community organizations. We have people who come to iTree from all sorts of disciplines, whether they're working with county and municipal tree care programs. We have, students doing PhD dissertations who end up doing really robust projects. But it's absolutely teachers, it's absolutely nonprofit and, community organizations who are interested in their trees and what they can do to either protect certain trees or help other people understand why you might need more trees. And a lot of times that will involve, you're talking trees with people who don't always talk about trees. So sometimes that requires a little bit of what I call translation, but it also very much just means meeting your audience where they are. It's sort of, as Dave was mentioning, the group who developed their tree tags to speak specifically to reference points that were going to be meaningful for the people reading them. So I don't exactly know what the tie between the med students and the weight of a rhino is, but hey, more data. So any way that you can take that information and make it meaningful is what's going to help you get your message across, but also, building those relationships with the people you're trying to talk to about this stuff is always going to get you further in the long run, and it will be a benefit for your project. The other thing that, from this particular angle, the other thing that iTree can do is help you talk about things that aren't just trees. You're trying to make it relatable. You're trying to talk about issues such as equity or the needs and distribution of resources where you are. There, are other factors that iTree can help you consolidate when you're trying to, again, bring this message, whether it has to do with working with public health for residents, or if you're looking down the road in anticipation of climate change. So community engagement, it can be challenging. So what we wanted to do was bring, a couple of examples of ways that this has been turned into, communication and dialogue. So again, I'm going to try not to do this too fast. But, again, these are, slides that'll be shared. I think that we're trying to bring a set of examples and contextual points to you guys today. So, don't worry about missing a particular graphic. We're trying to, work through some of these ideas with you in terms of what we've looked at so far. One of the things that we talk about, Dr. Dave in particular, he will, say that he speaks for the trees. And so that's great. And we may all know the Dr. Seuss story, but what does that mean, right? So again, we've talked about how it can mean talking to different kinds of people, but it's also about understanding the different things that are, existing with your trees, right? That's people, that's other habitats, that's infrastructure. And the iTree tools, particularly Canopy or something like Landscape and Design, can help you visualize those things. It can help you talk about those additional pieces of the environment that can come into play with your messaging, and making the points that, you're interested in sharing. Because once you can, we've talked about the Canopy assessment itself, and I don't just mean the Canopy tool, but when you've done that, you can start to talk about what your results mean for the place where you are and for the work that you're doing. And that is a strong way to start to engage communities around this conversation. So I want to take a quick look at Springfield, Massachusetts, which is where Dave Bloniarz hails from. I feel like I'm doing the Dave B side show today. Sorry about that. But what I really like about this project is that through a series of iTree canopy assessments, this particular nonprofit organization, Regreen Springfield in Massachusetts, was able to highlight not just canopy coverage for their area, but they also they broke it down to the neighborhood perspective. And what that allowed them to do was issue a series of reports. And ultimately, these were tools that were able to help decision makers think about what the neighborhoods need in terms of, tree plans or canopy goals. And what was nice about that was that it ended up being not just then that canopy project for Springfield as a whole, but they broke down the geographies and did a number of them across neighborhoods so that they could do this comparison for canopy cover. And they put that together with stories about the histories and sort of the flavor and the context for these neighborhoods. So it really became a valuable way to take this data and take information that existed or that was complementary to what they were discovering about each neighborhood and put it in one format that was going to be visually compelling and was going to target information that Regreen Springfield wanted to highlight in terms of where neighborhood assets were and how they might, put together projects to help that grow, whether or not it was, looking in equitable locations or if they were trying to increase canopy cover and canopy benefits for particular neighborhoods. And I quickly want to show off one of the additional things that Springfield and basically Western Massachusetts was able to accomplish with a canopy change survey. This was a really interesting development related to what you might call, environmental, natural disaster type impact. So when in 2011, there was an unusually late and strong tornado that struck Western Massachusetts. And you could see the evidence in the satellite imagery, right? So because Springfield was familiar with iTree Canopy, they knew they had access to this tool that could help them take a look at the damage and could start to help them frame what they were going to do moving forward. So if you look at the take you back. I'm sorry, I thought I had the original image, but this was what showed up on the satellite imagery for that tornado. You could still see it several years later, as a matter of fact. And setting up the change survey, which again is the one that would utilize Google Earth to look at change over time, they were able to demonstrate some areas of the loss. They were able to put a value on some of what that meant for tree benefits or the loss of those benefits, and it helped inform what they were going to do to try to repair that and think about best ways to move forward. One of those examples, and I chose this golf course primarily just because it was an example that would be easy for us to see, but these are the kinds of things you can see in a change survey where you had prior in 2010, prior to the tornado, they were able to look at this benchmark, but more specifically at this golf course, you can see immediately, or the year following the tornado, the spring afterwards, you can see the extent of the damage. And then when they came in to do some new plantings, then by 2018, they were able to go ahead and take a look at it, right? So we can see these teeny tiny trees that have cropped up, but now they have this information and then they're going to be able to carry it forward. Here we are already 2023, and I haven't checked back with the golf course. However, it would be really interesting. I wouldn't even have to. I could go into Canopy and sort of take a look at those things myself. It starts to tell your story, and it can start to inform what you know about the impact of planning projects, whether it was a natural disaster or not. But again, the ability to follow up on something you have a benchmark for, as well as look to the future in a number of ways to look at impact and to think about future needs. Many of the iTree tools can accomplish this. I do want to also just quickly be sure to mention this. There are a number of ways that we've talked to, folks who have utilized iTree Landscape for this visualization aspect, right? One of the quickest ways to bring these points home where you are is to show people what it is you're talking about. I find maps to be really effective for that. But it's just a way to make the data shine, right? So whether or not you're looking at resource distribution for canopy or demographics, it's also a way to think about where your pollution concentrations are, right? When we talk about benefits, we can see through something like landscape, where do you have mitigation happening, but also where are you seeing the higher concentrations of these environmental risks, including future climate risks. We use this to talk about the urban heat island impact, right? There's land surface temperature data within landscape that can help you approach the conversations about the cooling impact, even in addition to what that means for energy impacts for your tree benefits. And excuse me, but one of the ways I've recently seen this at work, and this is not, I'm about to show off some imagery that's from New Mexico. This is obviously an offshoot of the conversation about looking at land surface temperature for urban heat islands, but it was very specific to this community. I mentioned it was Las Cruces, New Mexico. That's why we can see some temperatures that are so high. But the imagery that can then show you the difference that is sometimes really dramatic in areas where you have impervious surface impacting or further aggravating the urban heat island effect. But it also just very clearly can show you, look at the difference a tree can make, right? So it's more about making these examples sometimes very explicit for people so that they can start to understand what it means to have not just cover from one tree, but then what that can mean to a broader area. The other feature that landscape brings to the table then again is those priorities. So whether or not you're trying to target certain populations or whether you're trying to target different goals for looking forward, whether you're looking at distribution that you want to make sure it includes equity, or if you're looking for particular areas where public health is at greater risk, that can be accomplished with the prioritization scenarios within landscape. Sometimes you want to be able to take the message that trees are an investment, right? Sometimes money talks, it just does. Whether or not you can start to talk to people about how trees are good for things like property value. Otherwise, from a program like design, you can see the impact, not just what a tree, the value that a tree presents in the present day, but also 20 years down the road. It can be a really useful tool to advocate for caring for trees where they are showing people immediately, look, this is right here in our community. These are the impacts for overall health. Sorry. This is actually, though, a slide that can speak to ways to look at the overall health of your canopy and of your trees, and it can speak to species and diversity that can help enhance that as well. And what I really just wanted to do was, I want to bring us to this last slide. Again, these are, we're trying to put context to these ideas of really putting these ideas into action. You pull this all together. We know that it's not as simple as printing out the spreadsheet, right? You need to take that and you need to turn it into something meaningful so that you can make sure that either if you're trying to engage the community because you need their support, you need, their buy-in, you might actually need financial support. Sometimes, Jason's going to talk to us a little bit about how to turn some of this data into proposals that, for funding to move you forward. But again, exploring this data through the iTree tools can really start to give you unique observations to talk about. And when and you can start to put them in the context of things that are meaningful for the work that you do, that can really be a great opportunity to open up that engagement, to think about resource management, and certainly always to foster that sort of stewardship. We know that there are some people who, for whatever reason, they don't feel like trees should be as important as they are. And if we feel differently, we can do everything that we can to sort of make that point. And then, that can be a way to continue that line of resilience, both for our trees and for our neighborhoods. But I am going to actually stop right there. And I know that I hope I didn't cut Jason too short, but we have a few more examples that I know he wants to bring that are more inclusive of where, how to couch this for your big, why bigger projects might actually be, and the long game can be where you want to go to. That was a long introduction, Jason, but it's all yours.
That's perfect. Thanks, Krista. And yeah, I think we've got the perfect amount of time here. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how iTree may help support and feed into some of your work around getting trees in the ground, supporting trees, and specifically how you get the funding to do that. So we don't often do this when we talk about the iTree tools. I feel like, we make the tools, we try and teach people how to use the tools, but we don't necessarily teach them or talk a lot about how to ultimately kind of build things with the tools for your local community. So we're trying to bridge that gap a little bit, and we've been talking about this a lot in the last week and a half or so. And just generally, why is funding going to be important? Really, if you're trying to get trees in the ground, if you're trying to support your urban tree canopy, you're trying to support trees in your community, none of that work is ever free. So it does always take some funding to do that type of thing. We feel like if you have better data and better science, you can use that funding for better outcomes. And we feel like that's really the kind of the sweet spot where iTree fits. We're going to provide you with the data and the science that will lead you to the best outcomes, that will support the work that you do, and will provide you with more information about how to apply for that funding, how you can make the case for the projects that you're interested in. And of course, if you're sort of in the urban forestry world here in the US, another reason why we're talking about funding is because of this huge opportunity that was advertised about a week and a half or two ago of this urban and community forestry funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, about $1 billion to do urban and community forestry work in the state. So we're actually going to have a couple webinars directly related to that funding opportunity coming up next week. So I'll point you to those when we get near the end here. But this has sort of started our conversation and thinking about this. So the way I'm going to approach this is we have a few examples. I'll go through the examples, and some of these kind of tie in directly for how you might put information in your applications for funding. But they also tie into things like, how do we decide what to fund? How do we make sure that we're just funding the right things? How do we make sure that that money is going to the places where we really want it to work? And finally, how can we help ensure accountability? And I think the iTree tools have a role to play in all those pieces. So I'll go through sort of 4 different examples here, or 4 different tools, and talk about that. So first example is using iTree Canopy. So this is a group near where I live, out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Little Conestoga Watershed Alliance. The Little Conestoga is a small river here, feeds into the Conestoga River, which feeds into the Susquehanna, which empties out into the Chesapeake Bay. So Lancaster County, we have a whole lot of farmland. So a lot of farmland runoff of various sorts goes into these waterways and makes its way into the bays. There's a lot to be done on these smaller watersheds. So this is a really small, this Watershed Alliance. I think alliance is a big word. It's 5 people, a couple retirees and 3 volunteers with full-time jobs. But they're trying to improve the watershed. So they're trying to improve planting, and they're trying to improve the quality of water in the river and reduce runoff. So what they can do, they can go ahead and do an iTree Canopy project for that watershed, just to see what is the resource that they have. So this is a perfect opportunity to do some benchmarking. Where are we starting from? So we know our watershed is about 65 square miles. We can do our iTree Canopy project, and we can come up with our percent canopy cover, impervious cover, since we're in Lancaster County, we have a lot of farms. We're also going to look at agriculture. We can see what those percentages are, so we know where we're starting. So if we want to increase canopy cover in the watershed, because we know that has a positive effect on water in the actual Little Conestoga River, well, we can say, well, we're starting here at about 19% canopy cover. What if we want to raise that canopy cover 1%? What is that going to take for us to do here with our Little Conestoga Watershed Alliance? Well, that would mean about 419 acres of new canopy needed just to raise canopy cover by 1% in this watershed. So that's sort of a huge amount of canopy cover for this small group of folks, even if they're organizing volunteers and other folks to get those in the ground. And it's only going to increase canopy by 1%. So just by doing a canopy project, we get an idea of where we're starting from. So when we start to think about how are we going to fund this, how are we going to get buy-in from potential funders, well, maybe we look at this a little closer. So this is another iTree canopy project looking at just the actual streamway and a 50-foot buffer on either side of that. So now instead of looking at that whole 65 square miles, we're just looking at 2.5 square miles directly adjacent to the stream. And we know that that's going to provide bigger benefits for the stream. So if we can start to talk about canopy in there, we can do our canopy project. We have much higher tree canopy cover, but when we start to think about if we want to improve that canopy cover directly stream side where it's going to do the most good, now we only need 16 acres to bump it up by 1%. So if we want to bump it up by 5%, we want to get over 50% canopy cover directly in that stream side buffer, we're only talking about 80 acres. So now we have something that we can actually take to funders and we can take to our volunteers, and we can make the case that this is a realistic project. And that's where something like iTree Canopy, creating a benchmark, creating a starting point, can be really powerful. Another example, and this is actually from outside the US, but I think it's a really great example of sort of how benchmarking can be helpful. This is a city called Charles Sturt. This is in Australia. This was provided to us by a friend of iTree, Jenny Garden, who used to work for C Consulting. So what she did, the city asked her to estimate their canopy cover. They had actually been putting a whole lot of money into increasing their canopy covers. They had already been funding a whole bunch of plantings in the city government was, and they wanted to know how they were doing. So Jenny went in there and she did 3 projects in iTree Canopy. She did the historical projects. And what she found was that even though they're putting in all this money, they're actually losing canopy cover in the city of Charles Sturt. So she went one step further and she divided the city up into public lands and private lands. And what she found was that on the private lands is actually where they're losing the most canopy. So they went down from 15% to 13%. The public lands, tree canopy cover, went up at first and then it stayed relatively flat. You know, it just went down by about 1/4% in that last 6-year period. So what this did for the folks in local government is they said, you know, we can plant all we want on public lands. That's what we have access to. That's where it's easy. But actually the majority of lands are private lands, and there we're losing canopy and we can't replace it fast enough. So this allowed them to say, well, we've got to change our perspective and we got to provide more funding for planting on private lands. So just by providing those benchmark, whether it's looking at a watershed, whether it's looking at a city, whether it's looking at it over time, you can very quickly get to, you know, making some real decisions about how to best apply for funding and how to get funding that's going to improve your canopy the most. So just to kind of say this, kind of put it in writing, Canopy is a great tool for benchmarking. You can definitely identify the scope of the challenge. You can see where you're starting from and make a proposal directly based on real data about where you want to go as far as funding goes. And within Canopy, you can also estimate the impact of increasing that canopy. So we know that we have those multipliers. So we could say if we're going to increase canopy cover in our watershed by 1%, how much stormwater is that going to keep out of running into the Little Conestoga River? So we can actually do that with iTree Canopy. So you can also do some of that impact accounting along with the benchmarking, which feeds directly into any funding you can make the case for what you're doing. So you can really show also if you've done projects, what is the impact of your work? You can capture your successes, and in the cases like that city of Charles Sturt, you can adapt to new information. So you can see maybe things didn't quite work out the way you expected, so you can adapt to those and potentially apply for new funding going forward to address those issues. Why iTree Canopy? There are other ways to get to tree canopy data, but iTree Canopy is really fast. You can do sort of that watershed project in about half a day. That larger citywide multiple points in time project might take you a couple days. You can really get that baseline data really quickly. It's precise. We know it lines up well with other estimates of tree canopy data, and you get that standard error estimate. It's some of the most up-to-date canopy cover information you can get because we're using those Google Maps, especially in the States here. You're almost never going to be older than 2 or 3 years with that Google imagery. And it's super flexible. You can do all sorts of boundaries. You can look at all sorts of areas of interest. So it's a really nice tool to do some of that benchmarking to feed into any funding opportunities you're looking into. iTree planting. This is an example from the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society. They plant a lot of trees in the city of Philadelphia, and this is on a Philadelphia Housing Authority property. The city plants all the street trees, so there were already a bunch of street trees here, but they wanted to plant in backyards. They wanted to get more trees around these houses in the backyards, but they had to convince the Philadelphia Housing Authority to partner with them to fund some of this work and also to do the tree maintenance after the Horticulture Society planted the trees. So they can do an iTree planting project with that proposal, you know, exactly laying out, these are the trees we want to plant, this is how they relate to buildings, and then they can estimate the energy savings. And this is exactly what they did. And they took these numbers to the Philadelphia Housing Authority, said, for these houses that are actually city-owned, we can save almost $200,000 in energy if we're allowed to plant these trees in backyards and around the neighborhood. And Philadelphia Housing Authority said, yeah, that's great. We will help fund this. We'll help maintain this. And this was a way for them, for PHS, the Horticulture Society, to gain buy-in and to gain a supporter to do this work. So iTree planting, you know, it's really nice for anytime you're doing planting projects. It's right in the name there. It's great for projecting benefits over time. If we just talk about small trees, we're usually talking about small benefits. So if we can grow those trees with a projection in iTree planting, it really shows the impact of your proposed planting project. Every grant funding opportunity I've looked at, they want you to show the impact. So if you're doing tree planting, iTree planting is the perfect tool to get there. And you can also go deeper. You can look at reasons for maintenance. So in iTree planting, you can say, what if we have higher mortality because we don't take care of these trees? Or what if these trees are, instead of being in good health, they go to poor health? How's that going to impact our benefits? You can run a few different scenarios and say, you know, not only do we need this money to plant trees, we also need a certain percentage to take care of those trees so that we ensure these benefits last over time. And you can evaluate your plan, evaluate your species palette. So what species are you going to plant? Which ones are going to provide the most benefits, and why are you selecting those? So iTree planting, again, it's nice and fast. You can do a planting project in an hour or two. We did one in just a few minutes when we demoed it early on in the academy. Obviously, it ties directly into anything you're doing around tree planting. You can get estimates of the impact of that very quickly for your proposal. You can justify your design, justify which species you're planting, how they relate to buildings. And this is already accepted for funding grants. CAL FIRE uses iTree planting in how they provide funding grants for tree planting. iTree planting is also accepted in LEED certification of landscapes. So you have to submit an iTree planting plan if you're looking for that landscape certification. So that's already there, and I'll just keep moving through. iTree landscape, Krista mentioned some of this, but this is an example again from our friends with the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society. They get money from the state, so straight state grants in Pennsylvania are called Tree Vitalized grants. And they do a lot of work in the city of Philadelphia, but then they're challenged to work in the 7 counties surrounding the city. So their big challenge in those cases is, how do we decide where to plant outside the city of Philadelphia? So the city has a lot of resources. They can point you to where trees are the most needed. They have a whole GIS department. They have a parks department with a bunch of employees who know where trees are most needed. But when you get outside to smaller communities, communities that have 50, 10,000 people, how do you decide which one of those to go to? iTree landscape can be perfect in those cases. And that's what we're looking at here. So this is a map, and the woman we work with at PHS is Dana Dentiste, and she does the outside of the city planting. She's in charge of that. So what she did is she took iTree landscape and said, for all the counties surrounding Philadelphia, give me all of the census places. So that's essentially all the cities and towns outside of the city of Philadelphia. And now let's rank those based on prioritization. And they went with percent minority, percent below the poverty line, and percent of tree canopy per person. So really quickly, you can then get a priority list of those towns based on those priorities, and we can rank them. And this is all just cut and paste out of iTree landscape. And we come up with places like Darby Township, just west of Philadelphia here, the city of Camden, the city of Chester, out here to Coatesville, places where trees are really needed, and there's a population that is underserved and can really use those trees. So in those cases, you can get to those very quickly with iTree landscape. We can go even closer. So Krista mentioned that we have these temperature differential maps within iTree landscape. So this is just zooming into that top ranked priority place. This is Darby Township, just outside the city of Philadelphia. And we can see now our heat map for Darby Township. There's Darby Creek here. That keeps it kind of cool in this northwest corner. But through the middle, we have this kind of major road, McDade Boulevard, that comes out of the city of Philadelphia. And you can see if we follow that through here, we've got a lot of our deep reds where it's hottest along that McDade Boulevard. So if we were going to plant trees in Darby Township and we wanted them to have the biggest impact for the people who live there, planting along McDade Boulevard would be a great place to do it. So this is what that looks like. So this is actually sort of a business corridor. This is a water ice stand here, or as our Philadelphia friends would call it, a water ice stand. But there's opportunities to plant trees on the other side of the road. So you could increase canopy cover here, and it would do a lot for urban heat island. And we already know that Darby Township is a priority area for percent minority, percent below the poverty line, and percent of canopy per person. So it's definitely needed, and we've been able to identify that with iTree landscape. So how does that work when we tie it back into funding? Well, lots of funding opportunities are going to want you to address underserved populations, or they're going to have goals that you can identify with iTree landscape. And that's one of the things with these Tree Vitalize grants. You can show that you're going to plan based on real data to put trees where they're needed most. You're showing that those trees meet a need. And within iTree landscape, we have so much data and so many layers that you can tie to all sorts of key metrics, things like human health or carbon or urban heat island or climate resiliency. All of those data are in iTree landscape. So if those are things that are important to your funders, that are included in their grant offer, you can tie those in with iTree landscape. So iTree landscape, why it's a great tool for this. You can create maps and you can get to that mappable data without any GIS skills or GIS software. There's really a wide variety of data in there, and it's really a key for connecting trees to people. So you can get tree data and you can get people data from the census, and you can bring those together. And that's really powerful for all sorts of funding opportunities, whether it's government funding opportunities or talking to nonprofits or talking to businesses that may want to fund tree work where you in your community. And another thing with iTree landscape, and this is just brand new as of this week, is that it really does try to address some of these funding needs. So within iTree landscape, we've just added this CGEST column here, and this has to do with the federal government's Justice 40 program. So they're funding, a lot of federal government funding has to go through to communities in need. And now we have a column in iTree landscape that'll tell you which of your block groups, so which of the areas you've outlined of interest, fall into those places that the federal government wants to fund things like tree planting or other outcome-based opportunities to increase the justice on those properties and increase equity on those properties. So that's within iTree landscape, and really quickly, again, you can pull those out and say, we're working on the lands that are important to you, the funder. So lastly, I just want to talk about iTree Eco. Real quickly, there's tons and tons of examples of people using iTree Eco. I just came across the city of Tempe's iTree Eco work relatively recently, but they've done an iTree Eco project on their city properties, on their city maintained properties, and they've estimated tree canopy cover citywide, and they've estimated those ecosystem services that we've come familiar with throughout the academy. They have a really cool map with this ecosystem service dashboard. You can click on individual trees within their map and get all sorts of ecosystem service information. But again, this just applies to city-owned trees. And they've taken it one step further and said, which species are providing the biggest benefits, and maybe we want more of those. So these are trees that they're recommending, still within a right tree, right place framework, but out of iTree Eco, they've been able to make some strategic decisions about which trees might be best for the city. So that's a really cool project. And another project that's really interesting, and this is a research paper, but it's a really readable research paper. So if you're interested in any of this stuff about how to apply iTree Eco to make change in urban green space, this is a great paper to take a look at. They studied all the iTree Eco projects in Great Britain, and they wanted to get an idea of how they were taking those iTree Eco projects and turning them into impact on the ground. So they came up with some really cool things. They did a whole bunch of interviews, and this is all different communities found things like, we use this to, this is in Swansea, inform tree species selection and priority areas for new planting. This is from their iTree Eco project. This Devon Ash Resilience Forum, we used iTree Eco to support monitoring and management of diseased trees. And it goes on. There was people who said they used it to support tree maintenance, build a case for a broader approach to tree management for wider public benefits, or climate change adaptation targets. So these are all from iTree Eco projects. So this is a really great way to point out kind of the vast variety of information you can get from an iTree Eco project. And just to kind of take it one step further, Torbay was one of those cities, and they actually decided after that initial iTree Eco project, they just did another one in 2022. And they've had some really interesting findings. So after their first project, they put in some policies to help maintain larger trees because they found from their iTree Eco project that was really important. But what they found is they actually had a decrease in trees between their 2010 iTree Eco project and their 2022 iTree Eco project, but canopy cover increased. So this is really showing the power of those policies. They were maintaining big trees, but they sort of forgot about the little trees. So there wasn't a whole lot of new planting, and a lot of the smaller trees died, but they actually increased the canopy. And now that you have all this iTree Eco information, now they can adjust their approach to strategic management and take it one step further. And that's what they're doing. They're now addressing their kind of planting deficiencies to get more trees in the ground while still maintaining these big trees, which they've obviously found have been super important to increasing canopy cover. So iTree Eco projects can be really powerful. They can have a real wide variety of results. And it's important with iTree Eco projects, yeah, they can support funding, but often they're also fundable projects within themselves. So lots of these granting opportunities will have an opportunity to support a tree inventory. So if you want to get more of that information, if you were in the city of Tempe and you wanted to go from public lands to how do we get to understanding what's going on private property, you could ask for a grant for an iTree Eco project. So understanding how iTree Eco works, knowing that you can do that sort of thing, and knowing everything that comes out of it is super valuable. Why it's useful to use, it's science-backed. It has a whole bunch of applications as we're sort of outlined in that project from Great Britain, that research. And it covers all lands. You can do just city trees. You can do just a park, but you can go to rural lands. You can go to backyards. You can cover the whole gamut with an iTree Eco project. So just understanding that and knowing that there's opportunities to fund those large projects, you can really do a lot to get a ton of useful information to strategically manage your urban forest. And that's all I want to say about the funding stuff. I just want to take a minute or two real quick to wrap up here. I know we're right at the top of the hour. Next steps for you, the homework for this time is to put together your own action plan. And when we say action plan, we just want you to sort of take everything you've learned and put it down on paper. So if you're thinking about possibly using iTree, put it down on paper so that you know which tools you were thinking about using, how you wanted to use them, and really, we think it can help it reinforce your learning and also provide a little bit of a blueprint for next steps for you and your organization. Super simple. Just think about things like, what is your objective? Really laying out what you want to do with iTree will really help you have a successful project. So think about that a lot. Put a lot of time into defining that objective, and that really helps inform which tools you want to use, what resources you might need, and what challenges you might expect to run into. As far as the resources go, there are lots more available. We know this was a really quick iTree Academy. Hopefully you found lots useful, but if you want to review anything, please do go to the iTree Academy page. There's lots there. All our slides are there. My slides with these links will be there as well. So you can get lots of information there. We also have a video learning page if you need to review how to use any of the tools, or there were parts of the tools that we didn't cover that you want to see more in depth. Check out that video learning page. We also have a support page, which leads you to all the manuals and also projects that other folks have done. And finally, post-course details. We will send out certificates of participation. Give us a couple weeks on those. We're also going to send out a feedback survey. Do fill out that survey, especially if you want one of those certificates of completion. We will have a couple different questions because we know there are folks from New Jersey and potentially ISA that might have some special restrictions around those certificates. So we might need a little bit of information from you. So keep an eye out for that survey. And we're also looking to do these academies again. So your feedback will be really useful for how we design those next academies. Real quickly, lots of other opportunities coming soon. I mentioned next week, we're going to talk directly about those Inflation Reduction Act funding and how iTree might be useful for applying for those in sort of a more direct way. There's also a UNRI webinar series that Dave B. and Eric Greenfield are working on that'll be coming up soon. And again, we're going to have another one of these academies coming in the coming months. And if you actually want to see that Forest Service grant opportunity, I did put a link in there so that you can track it down. Lastly, just thanks from all of us on the team. I know this went really fast. We really appreciate all your attention. Know that this was our first time giving this a try, so we really are interested in your feedback so we can improve it next time. We also wanted to thank the Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Program. They provided some of the funding so that we could bring this iTree Academy to you as well. And with that, if you have any success stories, questions, suggestions for us, always reach out at info@itreetools.org. And I'll just say one last thank you from the whole team for your time and for joining us for the last 6 weeks or so.